I'm not a huge fan on doing, review videos or demos of plugins on this channel. I don't do it very often, so, right out of the gate, if I'm taking time to do this, this probably sounds pretty good. A while back, I did a review demo of the Sidecar plugin that Pulsar Modular did in conjunction with Marc Daniel Nelson. It sounded really good. Everyone loved that. It was very well received. I was very impressed with it. I had my API console and a cool hybrid setup at the time, so I was a good person to kind of put it through the ringer and do some real world comparisons with hardware. Again, that plugin was great. So they had told me for a while they'd sent me some sound samples and comparisons of a tape plugin they're working on. So they have finally released that. They're doing it in conjunction with Marc Daniel Nelson again. I think they're officially calling it the P821 MDN. It's a emulation of the old Stevens machines, which a lot of people don't know about. I think like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors was recorded on one. That would probably be one of the big albums that everyone knows, but not a lot of info on the Stevens machines, but tons of engineers that worked on tape back in the day just were crazy about them. They're considered some of the best tape machines made. So this is great too, because even if you have a lot of tape emulations, this isn't a Studer or an Ampex or any of the others that have been overdone to death. This is a fresh take on something that not a lot of people focus on hardware wise. So let's go through the features real quick. I'm sure Mark or someone's going to end up doing a deep dive into all the features and overviews of the plugin. I don't want to spend too much time doing that. I'm sure a bunch of other people will do that. I'll give you a quick overview just to start, and then we're actually going to hear this because it's a plugin. Go download it. Why are you watching a video of some idiot like me walk through this plugin with you? Download it and try it yourself. Are you crazy? Yes, we're all a little crazy. Anyway, all right, so stock. You've got tape and through, which through actually turns off the tape, so you can just hear how the electronics sound. It's a solid state machine. It's not too colorful. It's not like a tube tape machine or anything, so the throughput's going to sound fairly clean, or you can turn tape on. The input and output are also gain by default, so if you want to drive into the tape, compensates on the output so that you're not tricking your brain. All right, you can also turn that off if you want to unlink those. You've got two tape types. You've got the 900 and the 456. The 900 stock. It's definitely a lot more cleaner, open on top. 456 gets super gooey and kind of slightly lo-fi. It rounds off the low end. There's a little bit more harmonic saturation to my ears. Stick with the 900 if you want something a little cleaner. 456 gets you a little more tapey. So yeah, that's great. Two options like that, they're very different, is great. I don't want like 10 different tape formats. That overdoes it in my opinion. You've also got the IPS, the tape speed, inches per second, 15 by default. Generally 15 inches per second, you're going to get a bit of a head bump on the low end, and then the high end's going to be rounded off just a little bit. When you speed up to 30 inches per second, generally that's a little flatter. So between all those, that's already a lot of options between those four. If you want to go really, really lo-fi on the sound, there is this lo-fi button where it changes things drastically if you just want to like distort the crap out of something. One thing that I do with alternate percussion a lot, like shakers and tambourines and stuff, is really stomp the crap out of it with a tape plugin. I'll do it on my Atari every once in a while I'm doing overdubs. I'll take it down to 7 inches per second and really stomp those shakers and tambourines. It can add something. That's probably about the only time I do that personally, but it's there. It's a cool option to have because it is not subtle. It's very, very different. All right. These options, the shelf and the bias, are great. Shelf is just an EQ. You've got a low-end shelf and a high-end shelf, and the cool thing is that you can turn those up and down pre-tape so that you're EQing into the tape, or post-tape where you're EQing after that signal has already been applied to tape. So that gives you a lot of options on how you drive things. Bias, generally when you're talking about bias on a tape machine, it's more of a technical thing where you have to bias that specific tape machine to the tape formula you're using. For instance, on my Atari tape machine, what am I using now? I'm using an ATR tape formula. So it's a +9, I think. So it has to be biased for that +9 kind of tape formula. So bias is usually a more technical thing, but on a tape plugin, we can play around with it, which is awesome. You don't have to worry about, screwing anything up. So when you start biasing the high and the low end, you can get some different harmonic distortion depending on which way you go on both the high and the low. So another cool way you can kind of color things to the tape. And then, man, one of my favorite things, I love tape delays. They're great. You've actually got a 7.5 inches per second option down here if you want to use it as a tape delay and get really lo-fi with them. But they've set this up to where you don't have to do anything weird with a parallel aux send to feed back into it or anything. They've already done that for you. So you've got a high pass and a low pass. There's your feedback, your offset, I guess. And then, yep, there's blend. So everything you need just to use that as a tape delay right out of the gate, which is great. I wish more people did that. Final thing is the hiss that adds tape noise. I think they said at 1%, that was like how the tape machine sounded naturally when they were emulating it and testing it. So if you want to hear what the tape kind of noise would be at stock on the Stevens, you can put the hiss on 1% or leave it off. I usually leave it off. I mean, why would we want tape noise? Because it's cool sometimes. It lets people know you're using real tape. But yeah, that is a basic overview of the plugin. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. Just download it, read the manual, listen to it. Stop being so nerdy. All right, let's start with the tape machine at its default position, which is the 900 formula and 15 inches per second. I did a video for AEA for NAMM when they released their new N28 active stereo ribbon mic, and I did a whole song with that. So everything you're hearing is from that. Go look on AEA's channel if you want to see that full video. But I figured for a tape plug-in video, a song tracked with all ribbon mics would be a good starting point. So let's throw this on the master bus in the 900 formula at 15 inches per second and just hear that compared to digital.
Why do we call it a murder of crows? It's what we should have called the billionaires and CEOs. The worst offenders come with those three-letter names: CIA and FBI, NRA and HMOs. Why don't we call them by name? Cast out this legion of demons we've made. Why don't we call them by name? 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 Cast out these demons we made.
You just heard the 900 tape formula over the whole master bus. Now let's go back and forth between the 900 and the 456 and hear how those compare at 15 inches per second just on the master bus.
Why do we call it a murder of crows? It's what we should have called the billionaires and CEOs. The worst offenders come with those three-letter names: CIA and FBI, NRA and HMOs. Why don't we call them by name? Cast out this legion of demons we've made. Why don't we call them by name? 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 Cast out these
That was in the stock setting at 0 on the input and output on the knobs. Let's drive into this a bit and hear how 456 and the 900 formulas at 15 inches per second sound over the master bus when we push in to the tape machine a little bit.
Why do we call it a murder of crows? It's what we should have called the billionaires and CEOs. The worst offenders come with those three-letter names: CIA and FBI, NRA and HMOs. Why don't we call them by name? Cast out this legion of demons we've made. Why don't we call them by name? 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 Cast out these demons we made.
Now that we've heard the plugin just on the master bus, let's get a little more cumulative with this. Since I bounced out a few stereo stems from my whole mix of that song, I'm going to apply the tape machine on every single stem in the session and on the master bus. For the stems, what I'm going to do, since I kind of want to be subtle so that we subtly stack this into a cumulative tape effect, on each of the stems, I'm going to keep it at 15 inches per second with the 900 formula. I'm going to back off on the input a little bit so we're not driving the tape too much on the individual stems. And then when we get to the master bus, I'm going to keep it in the 900 formula. I'm going to switch it up to 30 inches per second and back off on that input as well, so that we're just kind of subtly driving the tape on each of those stems and the master bus and stack, tracking at 15, mixing into 30 on the master bus.